The crash of Yemenia Airways Flight 626 would be a prime example of an accident that investigators would label as unsurvivable. In the early hours of June 30th, 2009, this passenger plane carrying 153 people plunged into the sea nearby to the Comoros Islands. The plane was attempting to land at the small airport in this tiny island nation. Let's take a closer look at that approach, and let's look at how the plane was handled and what the airport demanded from the pilots. Yemenia Airways, as its name suggests, is the national air carrier for the country of Yemen. Located on the southwestern section of the Arabian Peninsula, the country's capital of Sana'a was once the base of operations for the airline before conflict tore the country apart in the 2010s. Sana'a Airport handled up to 80% of all air traffic in the country before the war. Because of its strategic location between the Red Sea and Arabian Sea, Sana'a Airport was seen by some as an ideal stopover for journeys into harder-to-reach destinations in the Indian Ocean and Africa. Flight 626 was one of those flights, a nighttime flight between Sana'a and Moroni in Comoros, a small island nation located in the sea between Mozambique and Madagascar. The flight was operated with an Airbus A310. This is an aircraft we've talked about before, but to recap. The Airbus A310 was a revision of the Airbus A300, or more specifically, the then modernized Airbus A300-600, which itself was developed from the first generation A300s. When the A310 was developed, it was given a shorter fuselage and largely retained the computerized flight deck of the newer A300s, whilst bringing it up to date with all the latest technology the 1980s could allow. The two modernized planes launched operations around the same time in the early half of the 1980s. First launching in 1983, the plane was popular with some of the world's best airlines through the 1980s and 90s. The type, however, by the new millennium began to show its age, especially when compared to newer planes, especially from Airbus. Yemenia first acquired the A310 in 1995. The accident plane in question had been delivered used to Yemenia in 1999. That night, in June 2009, sources seemed to indicate there were 3 pilots on the flight deck of this A310, rather unusual for the plane, which only requires 2 pilots. 44-year-old Captain Khalid Hajeb had been flying the A310 for many years and was promoted to captain around 4 years before the accident. He joined the airline all the way back in 1989, accumulating nearly 8,000 flight hours across his career. He was joined on the flight deck by his older first officer, 50-year-old Ali Atif. Much like the captain, he had been with the airline for many years and had accumulated most of his flying time in the Airbus A310. As stated, sources seem to point to the addition of a third member of the flight crew, a flight engineer by the name of Ali Salem, although official information is somewhat limited about this member of crew. Many of the passengers who boarded Flight 626 that evening had originated in France, taking advantage of the connection that Yemenia provided to Comoros. In all, there were 142 passengers plus 11 crew members, including flight attendants and pilots, for a total of 153 people on board the plane. In the evening of June 29, 2009, Yemenia Flight 626 left Sana'a Airport and began flying south towards Comoros. Throughout their journey, the pilots were in communication with controllers in Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, and Madagascar. It's a flight that was expected to have taken just under 5 hours, with an expected arrival time of 2 a.m. on June 30th. Controllers in Antananarivo handed the plane off to controllers in Comoros ready for their approach into Moroni. Let's take a moment to discuss the airport in question and the approach it demanded from the pilots that night. Moroni Airport at the time, and even still to this very day, lacks an instrument landing system for approaching in both directions. Only approaches from the south for runway 20 could take advantage of the ILS system. There were and still are other ground-based navigational aids, namely a VOR and non-directional beacon equipment positioned on the island. As you'd might expect, given how the ILS was set up in this way, Approaches from the south were preferred. However, wind that night was also blowing from the south at speeds between 20 and 30 knots. That is, around 50 km/h winds. As a general rule of thumb, landing opposing the wind is ideal. So for Flight 626, the pilots were cleared for an unusual approach to the runway. They were to fly over the airport, intercepting the VOR beacon located there, then fly outbound for several miles and intercept the ILS for runway 02. They would then descend down the ILS, approaching the runway on this end, but would leave the glide path and circle the airport to the west out over the water and land on runway 20 from the north, taking advantage of the wind conditions. The following is the cockpit voice recording from the flight deck. The time at this point was around 1:40 in the morning.
626, 8000, approaching, overhead.
Okay, 626 copies and continue descent to 3000 feet QNH. We report inbound, establish on localizer, and expect rotor circle for runway 20. Runway 20 news with 210 degrees, 30 knots of wind.
What's the wind direction? Wind direction?
Wind direction 200 degrees, 200 degrees.
And the speed now?
Okay, the speed from 17 knots to 30 knots.
Thank you. And confirm the light over the flashing light is on for runway 20.
Flashing lights on runway 20. I'm afraid no.
No, I mean I'm looking for the light, the flashing light in runway 20 beacon.
Yes, I understand. I understand, but I'm afraid it's not operative.
Okay. And, can you give me the maximum runway light on runway light?
Okay, I'll do it.
Thank you.
The pilots, as intended, flew past the airport and turned to intercept the ILS for runway 02. To decrease altitude further, the pilots had deployed the speed brakes, small flaps that stand on top of the wings to disrupt airflow. It not only slows a plane down, but is also an ideal tool for descending faster. Before the turn to intercept the ILS, the speed brakes were retracted. The pilots, as you will now hear, did have some concern about the wind conditions at the airport. They would request up-to-date information from the controller for landing on the opposite side of the runway.
Establish localizer, Yemenia 626.
626 copies. Report right down in for runway 20.
Can you increase your voice, please?
Okay, report right down in runway 20.
What's the wind now?
Say again?
Wind check.
Okay, wind is 200 degrees, 20 knots to 30 knots.
Okay, Yemenia 626.
But on runway 20, the wind is less strong. It varies between 2 knots to 5 knots.
What's the wind direction runway 20?
The same direction, 200 degrees. 200 degrees.
Runway 20.
Confirm, the both runways 200 degrees, but on runway 20, the wind is less strong.
Thank you, sir.
As the pilots continued down the glide slope, they incrementally started bringing out the flaps, as a pilot would normally do. Part of the autopilot was disengaged, and the plane was put into heading mode. At just a few miles from the airport, they began to drift above the glide slope, and the landing gear was lowered. The plane was then banked to the left again as intended, for the maneuver to circle to land on the opposite side. This was the autopilot disconnect alert. The pilots now had manual control of the plane at an altitude of around 800 feet. In the next moments, things would begin to go wrong. It is believed that the pilot flying had turned his attention outside to look and keep a visual on the airport. To do so, he turned his attention away from the instruments, and the vertical speed began to drop significantly, reaching a maximum in this moment of negative 200 feet per minute.
Flight downwind Yemenia 626. 626 report final.
The ground proximity warning system kicked in, and the pilots immediately took action, pulling the nose of the plane up, recovering at this point at an altitude of just 400 feet. They then tried to turn again, and the plane dropped to below 200 feet. Another ground proximity warning system alert led to them abandoning the approach.
We'll call you long final Yemenia 626. 626 right.
The nose of the plane was raised up, throttles were increased, and the landing gear was retracted. Their heading at this point took them north. Configuring their plane for the missed approach, the autopilot was reconnected, and they selected a new speed of 180 knots and brought the flaps to 0. With the autothrust still engaged, it began adjusting for the desired speeds selected by the pilots. In this case, the autothrust brought the engine power down. Very little altitude had been gained. To address this, the autopilot was disconnected again, and the control wheel was pulled back, pitching the nose of the plane up. We need to pause here. The action of pitching the nose substantially up led to a response by the plane itself. Airbus are known for implementing computerized and automated systems on their planes. One of those key automated systems is a low-speed protection system known as Alpha Floor. On the A310, Alpha Floor is designed to partly take over control of the plane from the pilots. What it does to intervene is to apply maximum engine power regardless of the throttle position. It was activated in this case from the plane reading its then current airspeed is dangerously low. As the nose was pitched up from the pilot's inputs, Alpha Floor intervened and increased the engine power to full thrust as it identified the low airspeed and stall scenario the pilots had just put themselves in. Red indications on the attitude direction indicator encouraged the pilots to pitch the nose of the plane down to prevent stalling. On Yemenia Flight 626, the nose pitched well above 20 degrees. They needed to lower the nose at this point, but failed to do so accordingly. They would maintain a high nose attitude. We'll let the CVR now play through to the end. We should bear in mind that there was more than enough time for the pilots to take the corrective action of lowering the nose. The plane would stay in this state of high nose attitude until the plane could not keep flying any longer, and the plane would fall. Yemenia Flight 626 hit the water in a nose-up position, impacting underside first, similar to how Air France Flight 447 crashed earlier that very same month. A plane crash at sea like this is very devastating. Chances of survival are rather slim. As stated at the beginning of this video, this accident by many assumptions would be labelled as unsurvivable. However, the story of Yemenia Flight 626 is also in part the story of its sole survivor, a 14-year-old French girl by the name of Baya Bakari, seen here in 2010 at a remembrance ceremony of the disaster. She was travelling to Comoros with her mother for a summer holiday, as one of those passengers connecting from France. She was ejected from the plane on impact. According to her own account, she was actually not the only one. In her own words, she said she could hear the voices of other survivors, only for them to later go quiet. At night and alone, Baya Bakari clung to a floating piece of wreckage for over 9 hours until she was spotted by a passing boat. It is unclear how many people survived the initial crash. In the end, though, 152 people perished that night. The pilot's actions in the final moments of the flight were criticized in the investigation. The critical stall that brought the plane down was put down to pilot error. In the years since the accident, the Airbus A310 began slowly disappearing into the history books of aviation. Very few of these planes are left flying commercially. Yemenia as an airline does continue to operate despite the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Yemen. There has never been a fatal accident involving the airline since. Hello everyone, thank you so much for watching this week's video. If you found it to be interesting, be sure to be subscribed, as there is always a new video every Saturday. This was a video I'd been wanting to produce for quite some time. I always remembered hearing about this when it happened, so I'm glad I've finally gotten around to it this week. This is the part of the video where I take a moment to thank my patrons over on Patreon for their amazing support. Their names are scrolling on the screen right now, so if you see your name here, a massive thanks to you. Shout out this week to a new patron, Joaquin Gonzalez Tapia. I really hope I said that right. Thank you so much for your pledge, thanks. If you want to support the channel further yourself, you can join the Disaster Breakdown Patreon from just £1 per month, and the link to that will be in the pinned comment below. All patrons get early access to all new content 48 hours before it goes out publicly on YouTube. I shall keep this outro short, so I'll sign off on the video here. My own personal Twitter will be linked in this video's description if you want to follow me on there. With all that said, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next weekend. Goodbye!